everyone, and welcome to Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host, Chris Kay. This week, we're changing things up a bit. This week, we're going to be talking about heavy metal subgenres and how we define them. So on this episode, we're going to be concentrating on the new wave of American heavy metal, or in more general terms, nu metal, metalcore, groove metal, and screamo.
These are all my favorite genres.
I know.
The new wave of American heavy metal has its origins in the early to mid-90s, with groups like Pantera and Korn. Taking much of its cues from thrash metal and hardcore, the new wave of American heavy metal splintered into three distinct subgenres: nu metal, metalcore, and alternative metal.
So we're going to discuss all that and more, as well as give you our big four keyboard players. But first, remember to tell your friends about the show and make sure they click subscribe however they consume their podcasts. All right, so Chris, the new wave of American heavy metal. I know you're not a huge fan of some of these splintered subgenres of this particular category of metal, but there are some stuff that you like. I mean, there's plenty of stuff in there that you like. It's just, you and I were having a conversation the other day, and somehow the conversation turned to Soulfly's first album. And Soulfly's first album, I said I didn't think it was nu metal, and you said absolutely it's nu metal.
Yeah. So as far as a categorization for, style of music, I think it fits into nu metal just based on the fact that nu metal is, a mixture of heavy metal with hip hop, alternative rock, funk, industrial, and grunge. And so when you take those elements, whether they combine in one way or another, they still fall under that banner of nu metal.
So what I disagreed about with you was that, I'm listening to the first song on Soulfly's first album, Eye for an Eye, right? To me, I'm listening to the only thing that sounded distinctly different to me was the tribal type of percussive drumming that was on there. Everything else, you're talking about guitars, rough vocals. It sounded like a metal song to me. Now, that day...
But it's a South American band.
Right, so there's the tribal part of it. I get that,
yeah.
Right? But what I don't understand per se is why all of a sudden, just because they're throwing in tribal drums in there, is it all of a sudden nu metal? Because they threw tribal drums in Chaos AD, but that was considered, like a classic or a classic thrash metal album, almost blending into the beginning of groove metal. And that's what Sepultura became, because that's what Roots was considered, a groove metal / nu metal album.
Mm-hmm.
So it's those are the things that throw me off, because I was a fan of Sepultura. I learned about them, I guess, around the time of Arise, but I really got into them with Chaos AD, and then Roots came out. And each one of those albums is a progression away from their original, quote-unquote, roots that they started with, which was basically thrash metal, almost death metal, or Floridian-style death metal.
Yeah.
So, they and then now they're kind of back to, the thrashy kind of metal. It's weird. They've been all over the place. And Soulfly went from being quote unquote nu metal to alternative metal to heavy metal, and now they're like extreme metal. They're really extreme in some cases.
So Soulfly, the thing though is about the first album. You listen to, say, Eye for an Eye, the first track. You listen to the drums, and they're not thrashy at all.
No,
they're a little bit funky, and that's part of it. Is the drums in nu metal are not anything like thrash metal typically. You listen to a band like, let's say, Korn. Korn has a lot of funkiness to the way they sing not just sing, but like play the music. And I think that's kind of a staple of a lot of nu metal. But that doesn't always apply to everybody, because I wouldn't say Linkin Park is really funky, but they're definitely under that banner of nu metal, at least like originally in that first few years of that band. POD, I think, is an example, has a little bit of that funkiness to it, because they have that rap metal, but like, it's hard to describe, because this was not a genre that I really got into, but I lived through it, right? There was a huge push of this stuff when I was in, say, high school. Kid Rock was huge. POD, Disturbed. They were all kind of like the bands that I remember hearing a lot about. Limp Bizkit was getting big. So all of these had like different elements in it, but when you really look down at all of the things that made them up, I guess it to some degree you think of like a taco versus a chalupa versus just any of those types of food, and you say, well, what makes up a taco? Well, it's meat, cheese, and a tortilla, and some lettuce, and all of them have kind of the same thing, but they still have different properties and they still taste different, right? So in the same vein, and as silly as it sounds, the music's the same way.
And I get that. But like, for instance, I'm looking at this list here that Wikipedia so generously gives us of what nu metal bands are out there, right? And you look at something like the numbered section. There's 311, which, okay, they're like a Linkin Park, they're like a Limp Bizkit, they're a rap metalish kind of thing, right? Then, underneath that in the next section in the A's, you got Alien Ant Farm. I don't know. To me, Alien Ant Farm is like college punky to me, but I don't know all that much about them. I go into the B section, and then there's, Bury Your Dead. Hell no. To me, Bury Your Dead's metalcore. But maybe I don't know enough about Bury Your Dead.
So it can also be a album by album basis to a degree, I would think. So if a band is qualified as one type of genre, if you think of like what typically defines that band, they may be put into, they were a nu metal band, but they may have an album that's a different genre. Like, let's think about Testament. Testament is a thrash band, and most people would say they're a thrash band, but they had a death metal album, they had a nu metal album, they had some other stuff. So this is a generalization.
You're talking about Low being the nu metal album, right?
Yeah.
See, and that's one of those things where I don't look at Low as being a nu metal album. It's definitely not.
What would you call it then?
Well, it's definitely not thrash. I mean, it's a heavy metal album to me. But I listen like the song like Low. Low is not classified to me as thrash because it doesn't have the thrash drumming, but it's more straightforward metal than anything else.
Low is like a groove metal album,
right? So right, but because groove metal gets lumped into, it's a splintered category from all the shit that we're talking about. That's one of the things that you can say, oh yeah, that's nu metal. But in no way in the world would I ever sit there and think that Testament is nu metal. Or that
no,
even that album.
I understand, but like there are tendencies in certain genres. So like if I put a demonic up against Cannibal Corpse, you might say, well, this isn't really a true death metal album because it has other aspects of it too. But you're trying to classify something in a way to sell something. That's really what it boils down to, is music companies want to classify something to sell you a product. If you like this, then you'll like this.
And that's what sucks about it, because like, for instance, let's just say that when Low came out in 1994, that's what the record company decided they wanted to try and do. We're going to try and put this in as a groove metal album. So they turn around and you say, Lo, the new album from Testament, groove metal's finest band. That would be the worst thing that they could possibly do. Because all of a sudden, everybody's going to go spin their heads around and go, what? Testament is a thrash band. What do you mean groove metal? And they're going to be offended to some degree.
Well, because as fans, we also want to hold on to these definitions and define things and feel like we're part of that group. I hate the term, but there's a lot of people that gatekeep certain genres, and they say like, well, this is the genre that I love, and anything that's not like this is not that part of that. And I get that. I've felt the same way too. Especially when you're passionate about something, you want to define it in certain terms because you're part of a club in a way.
Well, I mean, for me, I learned how to accept change in music at an early age, literally around the age of 10. Okay, because I went from listening to this band that was hard rock. It was the first real hard rock band that I listened to, and I'm talking about Kiss. And I pick up Alive 2, and I'm listening to some really intense music. I pick up some of their earlier albums, and then, their brand new album, Dynasty, get it at your local record store, was horrible. Right? But horrible to who? It was horrible to diehards. When I listened to I Was Made for Loving You, I was 10 years old. I'm sitting there thinking, this is cool. Because I was just able to, snap my fingers, bop my head, move to the beat. And I didn't know any better. I wasn't confined by genres and confined by what I was supposed to listen to. And then the next song after that is Charisma. Oh no, it wasn't. It was the first song on side 2 was Charisma from Gene Simmons. Gene was singing it, but there was Save Your Love from Ace Frehley. There was, Sure Know Something. There was all sorts of different kind of songs. Every other song after that was kind of rock. All of Ace's songs were hard rockish. Gene's were in the middle, and there was one really crappy song by Peter Criss called Hooligan. Oh no, it wasn't Hooligan. Dirty Living. Hooligan was on Love Gun. And, but I Was Made for Loving You stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, that was a disco song. And then they pull out The Elder. So I'm going from Kiss Alive 2, right, which was the height of their popularity, to Dynasty, I forgot Unmasked, which was just a continuation of more kind of, easy listening rock, or more disco beats. And then The Elder, it turns into an easy listening album, literally legit, stuff on there that you could easily listen to on a elevator. And then Creatures of the Night comes out bombastically, and then I lived through it again, going from the 80s to the 90s into the mid 90s with Metallica.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some bands that are really hard to define because they're always chasing trends or they may be trendsetters, so they're not as easily defined. I mean, I think if you said, what is Kiss musically, I would think most people would still say they're a rock and roll or rock band.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to say they're a rock band. I mean, even AC/DC, I mean, up to, all the Bon Scott stuff, up to Highway to Hell, they're not playing in anything tuned down. They're not playing anything where it's overly crunchy, because if you listen to all the guitar sounds, it's not extremely distorted. It became more distorted on Back in Black. Back in Black is it's almost like, everyone talks about, it's the epitome of heavy metal albums. In reality, it's a hard rock album, but it's really, really hard in terms of hard rock, and some people will sit there, well, that's the number one metal album of all time. For some people, for other people, it's not. And AC/DC have gone back. Like when they got to Ballbreaker, they went back to that style that they did in the 70s, but the guitar sounds were still a little heavier, so it was just very strange. But they never changed their songwriting. For some reason, their sound changed that made it seem that way.
I think not changing their songwriting is an understatement.
Yeah, that is an understatement, absolutely, because they did not change their songwriting their entire career.
Yeah, I mean, so you can say, if you look on the list, right, the list of nu metal bands that we're talking about, you can define certain bands as fitting under there at certain times, but they're not just strictly that category, because like Limp Bizkit is listed on there, right? And Limp Bizkit is nu metal, rap rock, rap metal. So they're also going to be under those lists as well.
But I mean, I would consider them nu metal just because that category, nu metal, included rap and
in the time period that it came out in, etc. But I'm saying it's not as simple to define always.
No, but like Fear Factory is on that list. But okay. they were one of the leaders of industrial metal. I don't consider Fear Factory nu metal whatsoever.
You know, I haven't listened to every album, so I couldn't tell you either.
So what really. So when this thing splinters, so you got Korn. Korn comes out with this really, really creative, alternative, and we're going to use that word, form of metal music, because they tuned down as far as they could possibly go, that people could still audibly hear it, and they're singing in a very unique way. They're playing funky beats, like you said, but it's strange because then they're throwing hooks in there, and then they're throwing there's a different he's singing clean, he's screaming, but it's all none of it is really using a vocal harmonizer or anything like that. He's literally just doing it all by himself, and he begins a trend essentially, and I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I can't classify that the same as I would Godsmack or Creed or Alter Bridge for that matter, because those Creed and Godsmack all came out at the end of the 90s as an influence from stuff that was happening before them. And
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you throw all these into the same category because there's nothing else to put them into.
So I think sometimes bands also would start out in one category, and then as times and trends change, they take on some of those characteristics of other genres that maybe weren't even a genre when they started. So, you mentioned Fear Factory. And Fear Factory, obviously, when they first started, were death metal and industrial metal. But as time went on, I'm looking, and it wasn't until 1998 when they're listed first as nu metal, which makes sense because by that time, nu metal is becoming a thing. And maybe you can say, well, they fit into this category a little bit more, maybe on purpose, but maybe also because that there's some traits of that category that we can define it as this to sell more records, or just because reviewers would say, well, this kind of fits into the same vein.
It does. I mean, when I think back and I listened to the album that came out, I think it was in 99 or 2000, it was 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. They were, I mean, it was pretty big, and I kept listening because I was listening to KNAC. I was streaming KNAC in my office, and they were definitely ones that got played a lot, Fear Factory. And I'm trying to look up the album here. It was Digimortal. right? It was 2001, and they had Linchpin was a big song for them, and part of it was that it was metal, it was industrial metal, but then I guess because things that they were doing early in their career, which was having rough vocals and then clean vocals, it became more of a thing that they were doing more clean vocals, and I guess less of the dirty vocals, and it fits into that new metal category. But I wouldn't necessarily, again, I don't see it, I guess because, and I mentioned this to you when we were having this extensive conversation, that growing up and being able to still appreciate Motown sounds, funk, Michael Jackson, when he went solo, and then there's Kiss, and there's Boston and Foreigner, so there's rock, all this stuff that is now considered classic rock on the station, but then you also have the classic R&B, and you have classic dance stuff. I grew up listening to all that at the same time because, I didn't know anything about FM radio until I was a teenager. So I was listening to WABC radio in New York. It was AM, and it was a top 40 station. And top 40, they were playing the Bee Gees. They were playing stuff from Grease. They were playing stuff, from Michael. They were playing, every so often there was a Kiss song in there, and maybe... I think in 1980, when Judas Priest broke through with "Living After Midnight," there's things like that. I heard all that. All that stuff was, influential on how my ears accept music from bands. And so I guess, when I listen to a band like a Fear Factory, or I listen to something like a Soulfly, I don't say, oh, well, they're doing this, so let me categorize them as that, because that's not necessarily their main thing. So I don't feel like I have to throw them in that category. But I guess I get it that other people do, because it's easier for them to do it that way.
Like I said earlier, there's 3 or 4 categories sometimes per album or per band. So, yeah, you can classify them the way that you want to, if it makes it more palatable in some way, but it's not as simple as just that. An album can be a thrash metal album / death metal album. An album could be a rap rock / funk rock album, or so. There's so many things that can be applied to it, and I think sometimes we get caught up in the classifications. And sometimes that can even lead to you maybe not liking a band because you're like, well, I don't like that kind of music.
Well, right. And that's kind of what happened with me in metalcore. Because it's weird. Me and my association with metalcore is very strange, because I can listen to a Sepultura and a Soulfly who have rough vocals. In general, I can listen to a Fear Factory for a little bit because it grates on my nerves after a while. And I can listen to those things, and then, all of a sudden a band like Trivium comes on, and I'm like, yeah, no, I can't do this for more than 2 songs. Or Hatebreed. Or Killswitch Engage. I just, those things sometimes it's just like, or back then, let me say back then, I could not deal with it for more than a song or 2. Until I began to understand what it is about the music, and bands like Shadows Fall and God Forbid kind of opened that up a little bit more for me, because I realized, wow, these groups have some really cool riffs. They got some really cool rhythms, and it sounds similar to something I know, but when they start singing, it's like, whoa, this is very different. And so me and metalcore didn't get along at first.
Well, I had a somewhat similar experience with death metal, was where I was listening to bands that were a little bit more accessible first, Megadeth and Metallica and stuff like that. And then I heard these really awesome riffs and harmonies, etc., from death metal bands, and I tended to like the melodic stuff a lot. But it was the vocals didn't immediately grab me because it's something primal. It's something that you don't quite understand. But I have also found over the years when I've listened to that kind of music, sometimes I don't need to know exactly what the lyrics are immediately, because there is a mood to it. There's a feeling that you're getting through music. And there's been, interestingly enough, there's been studies done where why do people listen to foreign language music when they don't know what the people are saying? And it has to do with you're able to lose yourself into the music without there being a message, without there being something directed. The instrument become or the vocals become an instrument in a sense. So that's why I think a lot of people can get into these harsh vocals, is because they are essentially their own instrument. And yeah, there's a component of you can listen to it and hear the vocals or hear the lyrics and follow what the lyrics are saying. But there's also a component of you don't even have to. Sometimes you can follow the mood that's being set with the music as well. So it's very interesting. It's a little off topic, but I think it's something that's worth talking about too.
No, I don't think it's off topic, because it explains some of the things that the reasons why we listen to the things that we do and accept the things that we do, because like I just said, it took a while for me to accept screaming vocals. It took a while for me to accept growling vocals. It took a while for me to accept Amon Amarth, because I listened to him and it's like everything about him to me is amazing. And then he's, when I first heard him, he started singing. I'm like, I don't want to deal with this, because I didn't want to have to, because I'm the kind of person who, I want to try to sing along with the song. It's kind of hard to sing along with something like, and then you can't,
But in a way you can, because it doesn't matter what you say.
Right, exactly.
You can just sing along with what it is, and I like to learn the lyrics of the songs, but there are times where just even just singing the harmony or the melody of the song sometimes is just all you need. So it depends.
Right. So for me, my exposure to metalcore came when I went to Ozfest 99, and I listened or heard bands like Slipknot, Fear Factory was there, System of a Down, Godsmack was there, and they're not metalcore, but then there was other bands like Shadows Fall, and that came a little bit later when I went to Ozfest 2004. But in 99, like I said, it was Slipknot. I remember the main thing was, I believe it was Godsmack, System of a Down, Slayer, Black Label Society was in there, and Black Sabbath was. I didn't get to see Ozzy until like the mid 2000s. So listening to those bands, I mean, I literally went there and I was all excited because all I kept hearing about was this band Slipknot, and they came out and it was so insane looking to me. I'm like, what? Because I had no idea what they look like. I had not caught a video. I had not seen MTV, which I don't think they were playing mainstream videos anymore. I had not caught any visual aspect of Slipknot. And those 9 guys came out on stage in the middle of the summer in those jumpsuits at 12 o'clock in the afternoon with the sun blaring down and those masks. And I was like, this is insane. Insane. And the people loved it. They ate it up. I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. Because I think they were the first band on the second stage. Holy shit, was that nuts. And that set the tempo. Later on, I think Fear Factory played the second stage. I believe Rob Zombie was the headliner of the second stage. I'm not sure if that was the same Ozfest or not. He may have been on the main stage and headlined the second stage, another Ozfest. But man, I mean, it was pretty sick to see all that, and I was like, this is different. You know? So, and then System of a Down, wow, that was different. I didn't know anything about them. I knew they had this song. I had heard some song called Sugar, but I had never really paid attention to it. I just knew that they had a song called Sugar that was popular. Wow, that was different. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a factor of that. It is like you mentioned how you didn't feel like Soulfly fit in that genre, but there's aspects of it, them being a South American band. Well, System of a Down has aspects of new metal in it, but it's also they're Armenian American. You know, they're half of them, I believe, were born in the U.S. and then half of them were born in I maybe Armenia. I can't remember. I'd have to look at the... So, like, I guess Serge was born in L.A., Hollywood. So I may be mistaken. They may all be... No, so there we go. Shavo was born in Armenia, or Soviet Union. And John is from L.A. So, but I think they've lived there, etc., whatever. So there's another aspect of when you come from a different descent, sometimes you're going to bring in those aspects of your music into that. So even though they sound drastically different than, say, another band that's in the new metal category, they still have those tendencies. And where do you slot it? You know, where do you put a band like System of a Down that doesn't sound exactly like anybody else? I think the best thing that anyone can do to try to categorize it is take the elements that you hear that are similar and say, well, you know, even though this band is fairly unique, they still fit into this category as close as possible.
Yes, Serge was born in Lebanon.
Okay.
And yeah, and you said, and Shava was born in
maybe I was
Union?
looking at the wrong category.
And Darren was born in L.A., and I believe John was born in L.A.
Yeah, so two were born...
Oh, no, actually, John was born in Lebanon, and he grew up in L.A.
So, yeah, so you have different influences from different parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really weird. It's hard to categorize System of a Down because... Yeah, I can't even sit there and say what he does is rap to put him in new metal because
it's not rap. No, it's
and even anything that may have been remotely close to the first on the first album, it's just they're so unique. Mm-hmm. But I can throw them into that alternative metal category, which is, you talk about the new wave of American heavy metal being this really broad category of all the stuff that happened from like 1994 all the way to 2002, something like that, mm-hmm. right? Then all of a sudden you splinters and you got new metal and you've got metalcore, and then all of a sudden alternative metal splinters off and it becomes just as big, if not bigger than the new wave of American heavy metal, and encompasses that many more bands. Mm-hmm. And that one, so for me, that category is even stranger because on my phone, on my iPhone, when I categorize my music, now I buy iPhones with 128 gigs for the sole reason, it has nothing to do with videos and pictures. Sole reason is to put as much music on my phone as possible so that I can have as complete a catalog of the stuff that I like on my phone with me at all times, just in case I have no access to streaming. That is my sole reason for having a 128 gig, and I hope that my next phone is a 256 and I can put even more music on there. But anyway, when I categorize these bands, alternative metal is huge. Pop hair metal, because I don't necessarily like the term glam. Heavy metal, and then I believe the other one is progressive metal, and then hard rock. Those are the rock categories I have.
I think it's funny that you don't like glam, but the glam bands don't like hair.
You know what? I accept the term hair metal way more than they do.
It's funny.
because it's more pop. But what happened was when the first time I downloaded something from iTunes, I believe it was Tesla. It came down as pop/hair metal, and I said, oh, you know what, that's not bad, and I kept it. I don't like glam because I hate and it's connotated with it. I hate glam rock from the 70s.
Okay.
Or not hate is a strong word. I don't necessarily like bands like the New York Dolls. I don't necessarily like the glammy David Bowie. I mean, there's some songs in there that were popular that came out, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it's cool. But Kiss, as much as they were glammy, in reality, if you listen to music, it was much harder than that. Same to Alice Cooper. There was aspects of it a lot harder than say a David Bowie or New York Dolls. And New York Dolls, I mean, to me, was more like New York style punkish. I guess it turned to me. It's more of an influence on the new wave scene that happened in New York than anything. But they had a lot of influences over a lot of different categories. I never got into them.
Gotcha. Well, so there's these bands, and like, say for instance, if you look at the list of alternative metal artists on Wikipedia, you have Alter Bridge, and then in the notes it says also classified as hard rock, heavy metal, post grunge, progressive metal, and alternative rock.
That's so, like, this is the only list that does that, by the way. The alternative metal list is, and also these other ones. What the fuck is post metal?
Post metal?
Yeah, there's a category here. This is post metal. It's a style of music that is rooted in heavy metal but explores approaches beyond the genre's conventions. It's weird.
Well, I mean, there's post punk, there's post grunge, etc. So yeah,
to me that's all the stuff that happened after the genre died.
But there's still bands of those genres around. There's still people that put out this type of music. I mean, I don't think Pearl Jam has ever really changed in style too much.
They have, actually. To me, they're more straightforward rock band than anything else. The first 3 albums were much different than everything afterward.
I get that, but they still have those tendencies, especially vocally, of how it's done, and they still, in some category, carry that banner of grunge in its current form.
I hate that term grunge.
No, it's...
And the reason being is grunge to me was more about the look than the actual sound of the music. But that's a whole nother conversation. Because...
Yeah, I mean, it might have to be another conversation because I disagree with that, but...
yeah, that's good. We got to have another conversation with that, but that's another day, another show.
But that's the thing. Like, so I noticed on this list of alternative metal, you have In Flames, with whom we talked about before, but we only discussed 2 of their death metal albums, or melodic death metal. And that's the thing, like, it says also classified as melodic death metal. Well, they are, if you listen to a current In Flames album, they are not at all a melodic death metal band anymore. So some of these bands change genres over time too.
And that is understandable. I get, like, you listen to them, and it's just like Metallica. Okay, on my iPhone, it all says heavy metal. Okay, it doesn't say thrash, doesn't say alternative metal, it just says all heavy metal, because that's just Metallica. But
because they're not really a thrash band anymore, but people still perceive them as a thrash band because they are one of the forefront bands of that genre. I mean, they wouldn't be called the big four of thrash if they weren't, some substantial aspect of the thrash genre.
No, right, I get that. What I'm trying to get at with that though is you look at Load and Reload in the 90s, okay, and that is not thrash metal whatsoever. There's nothing on any of those albums that's thrash.
Yeah,
nothing.
they're country rock albums.
And they are literally, they were thrown into alt rock or alt metal, which that's a bastardized version of alternative metal. They were thrown into alternative metal. They were thrown into grunge, and which I didn't understand that either.
I've never heard that before.
Oh yeah. A million interviews that I read in 95, 96, or before. Well, actually, let's say 96, 97. They were talking about the album coming out. They were talking when the album came out. They were thrown in there into the grungy part because it wasn't thrash. It wasn't what they were used to. You think about it, they only put out 3 albums of new music in the 90s.
But this is record companies trying to define something to maximize sales.
Right.
Because you're looking in hindsight, nobody calls Load and Reload grunge.
No.
But maybe at the time they were trying to classify them to get that market. But you would say hard rock, heavy metal, maybe alternative metal. There's some aspects of country rock in Load. So you would maybe say that, southern metal even maybe.
Yeah, they're right up there with what's that band? I just saw their name. Blackstone Cherry.
But I'm saying again, there's two sides of this conversation. There's us, the fans, who are trying to categorize it because we want to define what we like as listeners, and what we say, this is the kind of music that I like, so that when you go up to another metal fan and you say, like, what kind of metal do you like, or what kind of rock do you like, whatever, you say, well, I'm a big death metal guy. And you say, well, I don't really like death metal. I'm more of a metalcore guy, But the record companies are going to call it whatever they can to maximize their sales. So that's two different aspects of it.
It essentially was a record company thing trying to generate sales and to get new people to come in. I get that, But I look at this list of alternative metal bands, and it's just Incubus. And you look at the list: funk metal early, nu metal early, rap metal early, alternative rock later, and then art rock later. They completely changed who they were. Much like In Flames, although they only show them listed as melodic death metal, but alternative metal is what they are now. Hey, look at Motley Crue's on that list as alternative metal. Where the hell that came from got me.
Those last couple albums, they're not hair metal.
I think Saints of Los Angeles was a return to their roots. It just wasn't a good album.
Well, that's fair enough, but I'm generalizing too, because they did shift in style. Everything after Dr. Feelgood was not hair metal in the same way. I mean, the Motley Crue album, the self-titled album, it fits more in the line of what was going on at the time, like what was going on with Metallica even. To some degree. I mean, they were trying to be alternative metal. Yeah.
I guess if you want to look at, they were trying to be. I guess that would be the album that would put them in that category. But I never, I didn't look at them as the only album that I would throw them into, quote unquote, the glam section would be Theater of Pain, because that's when they were glammy. But I don't look at
Shout at the Devil. They're wearing women's clothing.
Yeah, but I don't look at that album musically as being glammy.
But it's the whole package. It's not just the music. You have to think about music is maybe different now. I don't know, but the whole package was they're presenting themselves right on the album cover with them dressed as women. I mean. I'm being careful with my words because you can't assume anything today, but at the time that was the goal.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Theater of Pain musically was more glam. The earlier albums had more hard rock, hard edge to them. Too Fast for Love, Shout at the Devil. And, I mean, Girls, 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 they were still dressing the same way. They were still had that same kind of look. You know, Dr. Feelgood, even to that point, they still had elements of glam metal. But I wouldn't strictly define them as glam. Hard glam metal, if you want to call it that. I don't know.
So the Dr. Feelgood, to me, is where, you know, where all the other glam bands, if you want to put them that way, that and Theater are the two albums to me, because Wild Side and Girls, 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 of the two big singles and videos off of Girls, 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 to me are more hard-edged than all the other stuff, and so similar to some of the hard edge stuff that's on Shout. But Theater and Feel Good, that stuff to me lent itself to what was heavy metal or pop metal at that time, in 89, I guess you could say, and then 85 for Theater. But it's one of those things, you know, where in 94 when they came out with the Motley Crue self-titled album, I guess that would be the one where they were trying to be more alternative metal.
Well, they weren't wearing, you know, the femme look anymore.
No.
You know, John Crosby definitely had a different look than the other guys. And then when they continued on, like when they reunited for, what was it, Generation Swine after that, they didn't have that look anymore. And they had some industrial aspects to that music too. So I mean, that's when they really shifted. It's just in the times changed. Like you couldn't dress that way anymore. You'd be a mockery.
Well, they kind of stopped dressing that way on Girls. They were in more jeans and leather-ish in Girls, and
but even beyond that, like you couldn't continue on with that look during that time period. Like the band that most defines leather and, you know, that kind of stuff is Judas Priest. And Judas Priest split in 1990, essentially. You know, they never technically fully did, but at the same time, like, it wasn't until, you know, the mid-90s when they put out or mid to late 90s when they put out the album with Ripper, they weren't dressing the same way at that time. It wasn't until after that they reestablished and it became okay to be that style again. But glam died in the late 90s because it could not persist.
Yeah.
You know,
yes.
Grunge made glam not okay.
Yes, grunge gave it a beating. My whole problem with the categorization is I hate, you know, like Tool is in alternative metal. Okay, I get it. But do you compare them to 3 Days Grace? Do you think they're the same as System of a Down? You know, do they sound like Static X? No, it's all in that same category because it's different, and that's where the word alternative shows up. You know, for me, the biggest thing was my view of that time period. I didn't see all this as different categories. I saw this as metal. It was just new in NEW versions of metal today. You know, it was, you know, this is where the genre has morphed into or evolved into, you know, and System of a Down morphed or not morphed. System of a Down, it was an evolution of what came before it. And all of these bands, it just all happened at once. It was just this big wave of shit that happened, you know, from 94 to 2000. All these bands just came out of nowhere. And obviously, you know, record companies had to put them in some particular category so that they could, you know, advertise them. But for me, I was listening to Slipknot and I was like, this is different. But I didn't even know. Quite honestly, I don't think I heard the term nu metal until the mid 2000s. when I discovered the name or the term new wave of American heavy metal, that's when I heard about new metal.
Well, I mean, yeah, some of it is hindsight, but it is just a way for us to categorize what we like. I mean, you can say, for instance, would you say Star Wars is sci-fi?
Yes.
Would you say Star Trek is sci-fi?
Yes.
But those are two vastly different things. You know, the
They
fan
are.
bases do not necessarily overlap. Sometimes they do, but for the most part they don't, because they're two different, very, very different concepts. But they still fall under the same category because they have similar themes. Even
they're
though
both science and they're both fiction.
but Star Wars is way less science. So, and that's not a discussion we're probably ever going to have.
No.
But at the same time, I think a lot of people can relate to it because it is the same kind of thing as what we're talking about, where you can say that Metallica in 1986 was metal. You can say that Motley Crue in 1986 was metal. You can say that Rat was 1986 was metal, but none of those necessarily had the exact same fan base.
No, and like I said, I think I mentioned this to you before. If you looked up the definition of heavy metal in the dictionary and you had to put a picture of a band, the question to the fans would be, who would you put? Now, I would not put Metallica because, to me, Metallica was not a pure heavy metal band. They were thrash at the beginning, and then they morphed, and they're a harder edge to their form of metal than other bands like Slayer's harder. The big four. The thrash to me is what it is, right? So then. Well, you look at the glam bands. No, I wouldn't put a picture of a glam band in the term heavy metal. The one band I always come back to mentally for some reason is Armored Saint. And not because of their visual looks, but because of the music that they played. They didn't follow any trends ever in the music they played. They've always just stuck to what they knew. What it is that they play. And that's the way I feel about it. Is that right or wrong? No. Is it's subjective? Yes. You could probably sit there and say, well, no, I don't think Armored Saint's pure metal, but it could be something else. Someone could sit there and say, well, Black Sabbath. Well, which one? What year? What singer? They've had 5 or 3. No, they've had 4 or 5. No, they had 5. Yeah, that's right.
How many singers did they have?
Yeah, they had 5.
Okay, they had Ozzy. Are we only counting ones that recorded albums?
No, because Ray Gillen recorded an album, but they never released it until
they did. They did eventually release it.
They eventually released it. So I'm counting Ray.
Okay, so you have Ozzy, Dave Walker. You have Dio.
Okay, so then it would be 6. Because
you have Ian Gillan.
Right.
You have Ray Gillan.
And then Tony Martin.
There's also, I think there's one more. It was Dave Donato. Wasn't he one of the singers? Am I getting that mixed up?
You might be right about that. Because that's did he join the band? That's the question.
So yeah, you have Ozzy, Dave Walker, Dio, Ian Gillan, Ron Keel, Dave Donato, Jeff Fenholt, Glenn Hughes, Ray Gillan, Tony Martin. I would leave, honestly, off of that list, most people don't even really know about Ron Keel or Jeff Fenholt.
Well, I would leave off Ron Keel, Donato, Fenholt.
But the fan base, if you're a Black Sabbath aficionado, most people know about Dave Donato.
Yeah, but I don't even think Dave showed up on an album.
No, he didn't. And
okay,
Dave Walker didn't either. But he was officially a member of the band. And these are people that were actually listed as members of the band. And if you want to really stretch out, you can say Ice-T too, because he appeared on Forbidden.
Well, that's just a guess. That was just a guess. Okay. But like the reason I include Ray is because he did record an album that ended up getting scrapped and then released as a bonus.
Yeah.
But I just look at the I would say 5 main,
568 members of Black Sabbath.
The 4 main guys.
Oh, and Bill Ward sang some songs too. Actually, now that I think about it.
Oh, Bill.
Mm-hmm. He sang at least "Swinging the Chain." I know that. Yeah,
I mean, but that's that's like Kiss. They had 4 vocalists. Anyway, the point being is that's the way I look at pure heavy metal. Armored Saint, okay, because they weren't a hair metal band, they weren't a glam band. Same thing. They weren't a thrash band. They didn't follow any trend ever. They just came out, played heavy metal. That's the way I always looked at them. And even then, like when Pantera came out, I had no idea about groove metal. What the hell is groove metal? Yeah. I listen to Five Finger Death Punch now, okay? And yes, you could categorize them as groove metal because you know what? That shit grooves. It's groovy because it's got a great consistent riff that just makes you move. It makes you headbang, and they've got clean and distorted vocals. So what category does that fall under? Metalcore, alternative metal, new metal, but they've got such a killer groove. It's like Volbeat. So that all those fall into groove metal. To me, that's just metal. Metal's always made me move, So that's a groove metal to me is closer to regular heavy metal than anything else. But not according to some people.
Again, it's how do you narrow down a search? Also, so if you're looking for stuff that is similar to what you like, you're listening to, I don't know, let's throw out Angra. You find that you like Angra as a band. So how do you define Angra? I'm asking you.
Brazilian.
Okay, but what genre of metal is that?
I haven't listened to Angra enough to sit there and say it, but I do know they're power metal.
Okay, so Angra is a power metal band essentially. So you like power metal, you go looking for other types of it, but you have no way of defining this right now. You don't know that they're a power metal band. You just know that they play guitars and drums and they sing high pitched songs and they have a progressive aspect to them. But even then you're not defining it as progressive because you don't know what progressive metal is. So you go looking for other stuff. If you throw on, you just know that they're metal, you throw on Testament, you're probably not going to be like, wow, this is similar. You're going to be like, well, I'll keep looking. So then you go and throw on, say, Stradivarius, you go, okay, well, this is really kind of in the same vein, even though...
Wow, you pulled out Stradivarius.
I did. Because these are both progressive and power metal bands, but they're from 2 different parts of the world too, so they have somewhat different sensibilities too. So, but you're probably going to enjoy Stradivarius more than you would enjoy Megadeth at that point, if Angra appeals to you. So the whole point to me is to try to define these bands in that if I like this, then I'm going to like this too. And yeah, the record companies are going to try to do that to promote sales, but as a fan, I want to know of other great music that's out there that I can find that's in the similar vein of the stuff I like.
Hammerfall.
Hammerfall might appeal to you if you're an Angra fan, but it might not. And that's the thing too, because Hammerfall also has a little bit harsher instrumentation. Instrumentality is entirely different word, but instrumentation. So even then, power metal from different parts of the world might appeal to you different too.
Yeah, I mean, you got Manowar. People put Accept in that category. So there's a lot. It is, for me, this argument, this discussion, this debate that we're having tonight, nothing's going to get settled, and it's always going to remain this way. It's an expression of our feelings that we're putting out to kind of just have a good conversation about how we feel about certain things. And, people are going to listen to all these forms of music and all these forms of metal and understand that it all falls under one umbrella, one band that created all this crap.
The Jackson 5.
The Jackson 5. No. And even then, everyone credits Black Sabbath with creating that. But think about what Black Sabbath did. They also had that song Changes, which is nothing of heavy metal. Nothing. Okay? But when you think about it, it gives everybody the opportunity to say, hey, well, if Black Sabbath did it, why can't I? Okay? And it's just have a straight piano and vocal song sit on my album. And I play heavy metal on a regular basis. So, they established that. Led Zeppelin had an album that was acoustic on one side and, mostly rock on the other, which was Led Zeppelin 3. And people consider Led Zeppelin one of the greatest hard rock bands of all time, and they've influenced a lot of heavy metal bands. Mm-hmm. So it's all there. So, and both bands started in 1969, and that, in all actuality, Led Zeppelin started first. So, or released their first album first. I don't know. I believe Sabbath started in 67. I think Led Zeppelin didn't start till 68 because they were just.
Sabbath was 68.
Oh, it was 68. So, but they started in two different areas. One Birmingham and then, Jimmy Page and all those guys in Zeppelin were session players. Well, not really, but John Paul Jones and him were session players. And then they found Robert through. Did they find John first and then got Robert, or Robert first and then got John?
Ooh, I'd have to look.
I know Robert and John were tight. They were buddies. And that's how they got into the band together. But anyway, I can't remember. It's been a long time since I studied Led Zeppelin.
One we're going to have to cover at some point because, they may not be specifically metal, but they are one of the influences that created metal.
Yeah, when you look at Communication Breakdown and tell me that's not an early metal song. Yeah. So anyway, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's funny how most metal fans would not really consider Black Sabbath to be a metal band, but it's always listed as a metal band because they're kind of the inspiration for metal. I think categorizing early Sabbath, the Aussie years as metal, I think is not really quite right. I think Dio was metal, but even then, when they went with Ian Gillan, that's not really metal either. It's more like hard rock. So it's hard to say that because when you think about when you hear the song "Trashed," okay, it's a heavy metal song.
That's a heavy metal song.
Yeah,
Zero to Hero is a slow, plodding doom metal song. So there's aspects to it,
But Seventh Star wasn't a heavy metal album at all.
Jeez, don't even get me started.
It's not bad. I had Seventh Star, and I liked it for what it was. There's a few songs that are pretty good on it.
But then but you were talking about Ozzy, and you wouldn't categorize those albums. But then you listen to a song like "Symptom of the Universe," okay, or what's another one that came out around that time? I mean, Symptom is a pretty freaking heavy song.
Yeah, but then listen to Never Say Die. Is that a heavy metal song?
Right, no. It's not. No, it's a pop rock song.
Yeah. I mean, Sabotage had some kind of metal sounding. Yeah, because you said
Sabbath,
Symptom
Bloody Sabbath.
It
that was
moves
a
into
song.
heavy metal. Yeah. So but typically they're not quite. They're like the proto metal band, and then they became metal because times change, and now we look at it from hindsight, and you say that is heavy metal. Judas Priest, Rob Halford says that they were always heavy metal. Well, no, they really weren't.
No.
Those early years, they weren't. But in some aspect, they were the guys that defined what heavy metal was.
Right, but when you look at songs like The Ripper and Victim of Changes, you can sit there and say, oh, okay, I can see that as being early metal.
See,
right?
I can't even see Victim of Changes really as metal.
I do. Because early metal, just the same thing as if you're talking about like Fairies Wear Boots from Sabbath, or Communication Breakdown. It's early. It's not as crunchy, as the way stuff sounds nowadays. But parts of it, like for instance, when you get to the middle breakdown of Victim, no, that's not a metal part. But when you're listening to the that riff is heavy.
But the way it was played on that first album, it's not really that heavy, but as time went on and they played it with their different distortion, then it became heavier.
Right.
So that's, either way, you could take it either way.
Exactly. So, ultimately, this conversation is all about just maybe mentioning bands that we haven't talked about before, enlightening people to some of the categories that are out there, and they know that they're out there, but they may not know that certain bands fall into that category, and they may not want to know some of those bands fall into that category. But we did mention a lot of bands that we don't typically talk about tonight that are considered metal of some way, shape, or form or another, and hopefully everyone goes out there and listens to whatever bands you like and do what we do. If you're going to go out there and you want to listen to something new, just pick a band and pick an album and just listen to it from first song to last song and really dig into it and say, hey, is this something, that you like? If you don't like it, you don't have to listen to it again. But, and that's the beauty of streaming. You can just pick anything. If you have a streaming account, that's great because you can pick anything, listen to it and say, no, I'm never going to listen to that again. Okay. But, we've received some comments recently about one of the last episodes where they thought that this album was going to be better than that album, and they realized, wow, this album's pretty good.
Well, even I had that same experience with when we did Ozzy, where we did Bark at the Moon versus Shot in the Dark. Ultimate Sin. Sorry, Shot in the Dark is one of the tracks on there. So I immediately said, well, that's no contest, Bark at the Moon. But then when I went back and listened to the tracks again, I was like, you know what? I'm wrong. Because I like certain songs on Bark at the Moon better doesn't mean that it's a better album.
Right, exactly.
And you have come around on stuff, too, where you never really gave it a chance way back in the day, and not necessarily for any specific reason, but just time or whatever. And then you've said, wow, this is really good. I wish I had listened to this, years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple albums like that, and I can't remember which ones they are, but I know I have them in the collection here because I'm looking at my wall.
But I was like that with King Diamond. I was like that with...
I was like that. That was it. We were talking about King Diamond. I got to listen to Fatal Portrait more and realize that the second half of the album is, even though the first half was all the one story, the second half had some pretty good songs on it.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Don't Break the Oath. The last 3 or 4 songs or something had some really good stuff on it. So you just got to give things a chance.
Absolutely. One thing I've really enjoyed about doing this podcast is that I found a lot more music than I ever knew that existed in some way. Like, I knew the songs existed, but I just never gave them the full experience that I have now, and I found a lot of songs that I now are in my main playlist that I never listened to before.
So I just had an idea.
I just didn't like it as much.
Well, right, exactly. And I just had an idea, and we're going to do an episode coming in the future. We're going to pick 2 albums and do a head-to-head. And the 2 albums have to be in the same subgenre, but of albums that are kind of obscure from the band, and put them head-to-head with each other and see which ones are pretty good, which one's better than the other. And I'm only saying obscure, but there's still got to be what you or I think are a good album. So, like a long time ago, one of the early episodes that we did one of those what should you be listening to, or what you should be listening to, and one of the albums that I came up with for that was Extreme's Waiting for the Punchline. I thought that album was genius. It was very good stuff, and they had great songs on it, but it gets zero love from anybody because it was the album after they basically got dumped by the record company. They had no backing on it, but the album is awesome. And then we need to find another album in that pop metal glam category to go against that album so we can actually break it down and listen to it, because I think people, when they give it a chance, will realize how great of an album that is. I think we've got to a point now where I think we can stop and go ahead and end this conversation here, because we can talk for a long time on all these bands, and we can speak for hours on end about it and have the same debate and continue to talk about it. And we're never going to, I don't think there's no winner, there's no loser. So we'll put a nice little bow tie on it at this point. And let's go ahead and go into our big 4. And tonight, because we didn't have any specific band that we were talking about, we picked up big 4 keyboard players. We have already done drummers. We've already done bass players. We've done singers, I believe. And I think we're holding off guitar players until we get to a really good episode that can bring out something about guitar players. So we picked keyboard players, and keyboard players are not the most popular of the bandmates when it comes to, they're usually the 6th guy who's sitting behind the curtain in most situations. But there are a few select bands, especially in Europe, where that's a lot more prevalent. So I'm expecting your list to be way different than my list.
It might be.
So, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Doesn't matter to me. I could go first, I guess.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and go first this time?
All right. So my number 3 is going. Sorry.
You forgot 4.
That's funny. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, I'm going to go with my number 2, apparently. All right, so my number 4, I picked Don Airey, the keyboardist for Ozzy Osbourne, Deep Purple in the later years, and Rainbow again in the later years. He played on the first couple albums for Ozzy where keyboards were a bit more heavy, and kind of helped create that mood of Ozzy was this kind of like not necessarily horror themed, but at times kind of had that theme to him with like songs like Mr. Crowley and stuff like that, where he was very instrumental, no pun intended, in making the mood on the Ozzy albums. And I just thought he was, a great guy, a great musician. And as time went on, that changed. But I think a lot of people, when they think of Ozzy, they think of, those early albums, those early years. And, part of that sound was definitely Don. Mm-hmm. My number 3 is Geddy Lee of Rush. And why I picked him is keyboards are a huge part of their music, but that's a three-piece band, and it really truly is a three-piece band. And what's so interesting about Geddy Lee is he is the vocalist, he is the bassist, and he is the keyboardist for the band. And actually, when playing live, he does all three. And obviously, now Rush is no longer together, but it's an impressive sight to see. So I just, he's not your traditional keyboardist, but it's really cool what he does, and I've always been impressed by it. And so something like that often sets it apart for me, too. My number 2 is Jens Johansson from Stradivarius, Yngwie Malmsteen, and he played with Dio. Stradivarius, I mentioned earlier, and you said I brought it out. Well, that's a band I've always really liked, and the work that he did in those early albums with Yngwie too was really impressive. And I think Stradivarius is a bit of an underrated band, but I understand it takes a specific ear to really enjoy power metal. So, as somebody that's been a fan and has pretty much always enjoyed power metal, I've always been a fan of his work. And my number 1, I think, if you know me, you probably can guess this one, is Jana Werman from Children of Bodom. What sets him apart to me above a lot of other keyboardists is that this guy could go toe-to-toe with Alexi, who is one of the best neoclassical musicians in our lifetime. Could go back and forth playing solos. The song "Kissing the Shadows" it's my favorite Children of Bodom song, and part of it is the latter half of the track is just a back and forth solo between keyboards and lead guitar. They just go back and forth. And the live album, Tokyo War Hearts, they did the same kind of thing where they would play off of each other back and forth. I was lucky enough to see Children of Bodom twice when they were together, and when Alexi was still with us. And there was such a fun aspect of, especially the first time I saw them, they were the headliners, of they were able to play off of each other in such a fun way, and it made the show just absolutely incredible. And I always just really respected what he did and what he brought to that band, because the keyboards weren't just something sitting in the back, they were a prominent instrument for that band.
I know what song you're talking about when you're talking about them going back and forth, and I listened to that. Now that is so cool when they do that, because it wasn't just keyboard playing; it was just some virtuosity that was going on in that song. It was just incredible to listen to.
Absolutely.
And it's funny you mentioned Jens Johansson. When you said that name and you said, "Oh, he's from Stradivarius," I'm like, "Wait a second! I just saw that name a little while ago when I was doing the research for this." Mm-hmm. And I'm like, "Where did I see that name from?" And I'm looking all over my wall. I'm like, "That guy is just not." And I know the name from when you said Yngwie. I knew it from that, but that was not where I read it. He is the current and former and current keyboard player for Rainbow.
Yes, and I did mention that.
You did mention that, but it was like, wait a second, Rainbow. He's like right there. He's actually the current guy. So even though they're technically back on hiatus, he is their current keyboard player.
That's the thing. Like, I listed the main bands that you might know for some of these bands. Or some of these guys, these musicians, but a lot of them have played or been like a session musician on a lot of other stuff. So you may have even heard them on other things, but not something you necessarily know as like Jens played on Hammerfall's No Sacrifice, No Victory, but he's not a member of Hammerfall. So a lot of these guys, or like more recently, Halloween released that Skyfall track.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He played on that one, but that's the only track he played on.
and you mentioned Don Airey before, and he's very similar. He's played for lots of different people.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, let's get on to my list. So, as expected, I knew there was going to be... I didn't know his name, but I had a feeling you were going to pick the guy from Children of Bodom. So, my number 4... And I'm looking at this list here, and it's kind of weird. But my number 4 is David Rosenthal, who played in Rainbow from October 81 to March of 84. He is basically the guy who you hear on all the popular 80s tracks of Rainbow. And like he's on the specifically the Bent Out of Shape album. He was very prevalent with the intro to Street of Dreams, and I forgot what the other song was that he's big on. But he just had a look about him. Richie Blackmore put together Rainbow in essentially the same way that Deep Purple was put together. It was one guitar player, one keyboard player, bass, drums, and vocals. So very exact same setup, and used the keyboards a little differently in Rainbow than John Lord was in Deep Purple, but at the same time it was the same setup. So I like Dave. Dave had a cool look to him too. My number 3, and you mentioned this guy earlier when we were talking about this, and many fans out there are not going to consider this guy a keyboard player, but if they knew anything about him in the 80s and into the 90s, he was the predominant keyboard player for this band, and that's Eddie Van Halen. He said it before in interviews that he used to write a lot of the music on piano and then transfer it to guitar for all the stuff during the David Lee Roth years. But he was so prevalent with all the Sammy Hagar music that they did in the 80s and 90s. Anything and everything that was keyboard was Eddie Van Halen. And you think about how popular Jump was, and that's the David Lee Roth era, but Why Can't This Be Love? When It's Love, all the stuff that was big keyboard songs, big hits for Van Halen, Eddie was the guy playing the keyboards. The guy was a master. No doubt about it. My number 2 keyboard player is your number 4, Don Airey. Like you said, he played with Ozzy, he played with Rainbow, he played with Whitesnake, he recorded with Gary Moore. He was like Gary Moore's regular keyboardist, but he never really toured too much or was not part of the band. And he also did a couple of albums for Judas Priest. So that shows you his quality. And Don Airey is currently the keyboard player for Deep Purple. And number 1 is the man who basically is famous for being the member of the band Deep Purple, John Lord. He's what all these European keyboardists look up to. I mean, John Lord was the man. He had a keyboard. He didn't make it sound like a keyboard for the most part. That was another guitar in Deep Purple. I mean, listen to Smoke on the Water, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. John Lord was just amazing. And when Don Airey had to step in and join the band, I mean, he had a lot to live up to, but Don Airey's good enough that he was able to step in and fill the role that was left by John. And John also played with Whitesnake. He was also a member of Whitesnake after Deep Purple broke up. So that's also an interesting fact there. So 2 guys in Rainbow, 2 guys in Whitesnake, 1 Eddie Van Halen.
I mean, if you didn't mention John Lord, I was going to at least, say something about him.
There's no way you could do a keyboard list and not mention John Lord.
Right? It's just, these lists are hard to do because we're picking 4 people out of a pool of, so many talented musicians and bands, etc., or albums or whatever. And sometimes it's hard to do that. So, if somebody that you feel is better than the guys on our list, or at least means something more to you than the guys on our list, then obviously we want to hear about that, because that is something that I like to hear too. Is who matters to you, who inspires you as a listener, as a fan, as a musician. So yeah, definitely tell us if we're wrong, or let us know what you think of our list too.
Absolutely. Well, that's our big four keyboard players for tonight, and that wraps up this episode of Debating Metal. So like always, don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe, and write your local congressman and tell him or her to subscribe as well.
And don't forget, you can interact with us by commenting on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or you can DM us as well. If you listen to us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a comment, or if you want, send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. And remember to tune into the next episode where we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe, and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.